The Christian worldview. Now, what is a worldview? A worldview, some may think that a worldview is um, how you look at the world. It's true because it's world and as view, but more specifically, a worldview are the lenses through which you look at the world. So here's, I think, an image that captures perfectly what a worldview is. There is a world outside, right, of us, of course, and there are things that are going on in the world. Now, all of us have to look at the world. We have to see the world. But when we look at the world, what do we see? So, if you are an optimist, then you may say that the cup is half full. If you are pessimist, you will say that the glass is half empty. If you are someone who is more practical, you would drink the water, right? So that is, but it's the same object, a glass with water, half filled or half empty. That really depends on how you look at it. So the set of lenses, if you tint your glasses with a tinge of blue, then the world will look more bluish to you than the rest of the world would see the world. If you put in other types of filters, then you will look at the world through those filters. All of us have to do that. It is unavoidable. Worldviews are necessary because we just need to interpret the world. The world filled with data, it comes to our eyes at high resolution. So we are processing gigabits and gigabits of information, terabits of information every day through our eyes. We cannot capture everything, so we would just have to have our preconceived notions. Not always a bad thing. Sometimes preconceived ideas, preconceived notions can lead us down the wrong path, but by and large, they lead us to safety because we have always consistently look at the world that way and survived and did not die. So chances are, if we continue to look at the world that way, we will continue to survive, you see. So no real reason to change that worldview unless that something drastic happens, that you see the world in a new way. So Christians also look at the world, and the rest of the world, they look at the world, and we each have our worldview. And what then is the Christian worldview? Now, of course, Daniel chapter 4 to chapter 5, just a few verses, is not an exploration in what is a worldview per se. It's not philosophical like that. Rather, it gives examples of what the Christian worldview is, and we can use those examples to then extrapolate into other areas. There are things to process, things to interpret, such as how do I interpret the role of the value of work, the value of education, the place of family, of money, of sexuality, of decision making. How do we make decisions given the Christian worldview? What is the Christian worldview on the purpose of marriage and having children, and so on and so forth? The obligations of the parents to the child, the obligations of the child to the parent. So underpinning all of that, of course, is one thing really, that there is a God. If your worldview does not have God in it, then you will have to you have to look at the world from that perspective, that there is no God, and God doesn't factor into your calculation, your perception of things. For Christians, inevitably, there is a God. And not only there is a God as a concept or a character in a book or some kind of a persona within you that you try to connect with whenever you want and only when you want, kind of like for your musings, but rather there is a being external to you and to me who created the heavens and the earth. There is a being, a tri-personal being who sits in heaven and is the King of Kings. And he exists. And he has demands upon your lives and our lives, and it is about living in reality, in the light that there is a God, and not just God in the abstract, but we know his character, we know his nature to a certain extent because we have his word. And we can even look into nature itself, and nature will tell us partially what his attributes are. That he is a holy God, that he is a loving God, that he demands justice and righteousness, that he prefers the poor, that he likes order, that he is good, and all of that. So we know what kind of God he is. More than that, we know who he is. He became incarnate in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. He was the Jesus of Nazareth. He was the Messiah, the promised Christ of the Jews and the Savior of the world. And he saved us from our sins by being nailed to the cross. Dying on that cross, he took the punishment that is due to your sins and to my sins and nailed it to the cross. So whatever it is that God is, it is not because he does. It's not that he doesn't love us. He does. He loves us enough to restrict himself in time and space as a human being and die a most gruesome death on our behalf, so that we'll be set free from Satan, from sin, from death. Oh, and there is Satan. That's part of the worldview. For example, if you don't have spiritual forces of evil in your paradigm, then when things happen in the world, your interpretation will be, it is this person's action, it is that person's action, it is this systemic oppression. So what we need to do is to maybe, is this person or that person? We need to have an education system to reform people, and we need to have some kind of legal system to punish the wicked. That's true. And we need to have we need to be activists to lobby for reforms in the system, so that the system would be more and more incrementally fair and equitable. But if, in addition to that, of course, there are evil people, of course, there is a need to better the system and all of that. But if you have the Christian worldview, then you know that behind all these things is spiritual evil. And that the devil, he is the ruler of this age. He is exercising his dominion over the system which you are trying to reform. And unless that is dealt with by the gospel of Jesus Christ, then that problem will always continue to persist. So you see, with having the Christian worldview, it changes everything. So therefore, Paul says, amidst all the difficulties that he was in, amidst the persecution that he suffered, amidst the imprisonment that he underwent, he would say that our struggle, Our fight is not against flesh and blood. It's not against other human beings. Yes, it is a human being who imprisoned me. Yes, it's a human being who leveled false accusations against me. Yes, it was a human being that beat me up. It was a human being who gave me lashes. It's because of stupid human decisions that caused me to be shipwrecked. Yes, all of that is true. But he knows that our battle is never against another human being. It's never against flesh and blood, but spiritual forces of evil, principalities, and all of that. So that is how a worldview would change, influence the way, not just the way we think, and because if it influences the way we think, then it would also influence the way, also impact the way we act, the way we do things. Everything would change because the lenses have changed. The world has not changed, it's just that the lens has changed. So there is a God, and we know what kind of God he is, and we know who he is, and what he has done in Jesus Christ. So then let's go through some examples that James talks about. He says, now listen up. You who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Well, or many of us say that we make plans, we have Gantt charts, we do SWOT analysis, we have a lot of tools, right? We have MBAs, we make decisions. Today or tomorrow we will go to this city, to that city. We'll invest on this counter, we'll invest on that counter. We'll spend a year there. We will migrate. We will stay here. We'll carry on business. And we'll make money. We will. James says, why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. How do you know that today or tomorrow you will definitely go to this city or that city? Or that you have a year to spend even, or to spend there, or to carry on business, or that you will certainly make money? How do you know that? What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. The universe has been in existence for 13.8 billion years. The earth for 4 point something billion years. Human history, who knows how long? Depends on what you define as human. But civilization itself may be 5,000 years. I mean, documented civilizations with writings that we can decipher. And you occupy 70 years. 80, if you're lucky. 90. That's it. A mist. Thousands of years of human civilization was there before you. And unless the Lord comes back, who knows how much more time there are in the future. And there are 7 billion human beings on the planet right now. There are many more before us. But right now, 7 billion. You're one. Even if you're 1 in a million, there's 7,000 of you. Right? If you're in 7 billion, a population of 7 billion, if you're 1 in a million, there's 7,000 of you. You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. What do you know? Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will. Instead, you ought to say, Inshallah, we will live and do this or that. As Christians, we no longer have necessarily have such an outlook of life anymore. Other people that do have such an outlook and have the word for it, inshallah. And that sets the paradigm. But here it is. If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. There is a God in your plans and in your decision making. If the Lord frustrates your plans, then what? So don't say that today, tomorrow you will go to this city or that city. That's too arrogant to think that you even know what's going to happen tomorrow. One of the songs that I memorized from childhood says, I don't know about tomorrow. Right? Many of you may know this song. I don't know about tomorrow. I just live from day to day. I don't borrow from its sunshine, for its skies may turn to grey. I don't worry oh the future. Yeah, I don't worry about my future. For I know what Jesus said, and today I'll walk beside him, for he knows what is ahead. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. That's not just a song, that's a worldview. The worldview is that there is a God. He exists. He's not a theory for us to study merely. You know what I mean? He's not a subject of inquiry per se. I mean, I study theology. I teach theology at the seminary level. But he's not a philosophical concept. Meditating on God is not the same as meditating on the merit of democracy or justice or some concept. You know what I mean? Some abstract object. No, rather it is a concrete, though invisible, being, God, and he's there. And you are making plans, and he has a plan. Well, you better make sure that your plans are in line with his plans. Because unless the Lord builds the house, the builders build in vain. The question then is not whether there is God. Of course he is. The question is whether you have this worldview that controls the way you live. It's always there. It's always there. It is natural, right? When your glasses are blue, naturally, without effort, the world looks blue. If in your lenses there is a God, that's a lens, then effortlessly, that's just the way you think. Naturally, there will just be everything in your plans, in your decisions. As it is, he says, James continues, as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. To boast here, arrogance here, is to basically to accrue to yourself something that don't belong to, that you don't actually have it. Here, for example, knowledge of the future, control of tomorrow. You don't have control over tomorrow. You do not know what tomorrow brings. Why do you behave as though you do? Who does? God does. Right? So therefore, if it is the Lord's will. So it's not just about adding a phrase into everything you say. It's not about sloganeering, saying the right things. No. It's not about saying the right things. It's about having that worldview, and that worldview informs your thinking. And out of your thinking, naturally, it would affect your actions, including your speech, which is an action. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. If you know that God exists, and you know that he's the only one who gets to decide what's tomorrow, so therefore you know that you need to depend on him and rely on him and trust in him and defer to him. You know that. You don't do it, that it is sin for you. I apologize that if you were ignorant of this before this, then perhaps it wouldn't have been a sin for you. But we're doing the book of James. I didn't decide what the book of James would be. I only decided that we're going to do the book of James, but the book of James decided to tell us this, and now that we know this, then it will be sin for you and for me to know what we ought to do, but doesn't do it. So this whole paragraph starts with now listen, and the next section begins with now listen. Right? So earlier, now listen, so that's one topic. Now listen, here's another topic. You rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. The corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. So, there is a God, a kind of God, the Christian God, what kind of God he is, that's most manifest in the person of Jesus. And Jesus, what he has done, and what will he do? He said that I will come again to judge the living and the dead. I will separate the sheep from the goat. The sheep to one side, the goat to another side. So say, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail. You ought to be mourning for having a garage full of luxury cars because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. What does this mean? This means that it's so obvious that things on earth are impermanent. Things on the earth pass away. Everything passes away with time. Everything is perishable. The whole universe will one day perish. If not anything, then it is the second law of thermodynamics ensure that the heat death of the universe. Well, before that happens, you would die first. And then what happens? So the fact that your food would rot, the fact that you may lose money, you can lose all of it, many do. People rail against the top 1%. Sure. But people who are in the top 1% don't always remain in the top 1% because things can go wrong and often do. So there's a lot of movement in that top 1%. People getting into it, people lost their wealth and joined the 99%. So these are temporary things. Well, the world may look at this thing as the most important thing because if God does not exist, what else is there? If God does not exist, then but the universe exists. The God does not exist, the universe exists, then material, matter is the only thing that matters. Material will be the only thing that matters, and so the accumulation of material would make sense because that is all the universe is. So that would be the worldview. So what have they been doing? They have been hoarding wealth in the last days. Says this is foolishness. Imagine, in the Bible there is one example of last days, and that would be Noah's days. In the days of Noah, from the time that God issued the command for Noah to build the boat, the last days began, isn't it? And people were doing what? People were getting married, people were giving in marriage, people were eating, drinking, having parties, accumulating wealth. Accumulating. And then the flood came. And then what? You have all the title deeds. Who's going to honor your title deed when everyone is dead? Including you. Why would you hoard wealth in the last days? So it's foolishness. So here is foolishness, hoarding wealth. In the last days, brothers and sisters, the Lord is coming back. When? I've got no idea. But he is coming back, or you are going to him. With every ticking moment, you are one step closer, one moment closer to death. That is true. By the end of this CG session, in about 15 minutes time or so, or however long, you'll be 15 minutes closer to death. That's absolutely the case. There is no denying it. So then, how shall you live? What would you accumulate? Would you say, I have another 30 years to live. I have another 30 years to accumulate wealth. Why? Their corrosion, the corrosion of these things, the fact that your food can spoil, the fact that your car can break down, testify to you that everything will break down, and testify against you, and eat your flesh like fire. It tells you that if your car can break down, you too can break down, and will break down. And then there's fire to answer to. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers, how did you become rich in the first place? Well, there are many ways, legitimate ways, and there are many illegitimate ways. So now we're talking about the illegitimate ones. The wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you, talking about oppression, not just wealth, but wealth and oppression. We're talking about people working in the sweatshops so that we can have cheap products and higher profits. At the end of the day, it's about the bottom line. At the end of the day, it is about increasing shareholders' value. And if that is the criteria, then of course, whoever you get to pay the least is best for the bottom line, is best for shareholders' value. So therefore, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. The Lord Almighty, Adonai Shabbaot, the Lord of hosts of the heavenly armies. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. What have you done? You have merely fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you, who was not against you, who's just trying to act out the living. So, what has this got to do with the Christian worldview? Again, if you are conscious of God, of Christ and his return, and the judgment that is to come, then your approach to wealth, your approach to how to accumulate that wealth will be affected, isn't it? If you think that there is no God in heaven, the fool says in his heart there is no God, and they do foolish things. That is hoarding wealth in the last days. What you will invest in, what you will invest your time in, would change based on the awareness that there is a God and that he is a righteous God, that he's a God of justice, and that he will mete out justice at the end. So that will color everything that we do, to the extent that it colors everything that we do, to the extent that that is our worldview. And to the extent we are sensitive to his existence. Otherwise, it would just show that at best he is some kind of a concept, some kind of a construct. No, brothers and sisters, God is not a social construct. He is not a mental construct. He is not a construct. He is a being who is listening to us right now, who is listening to me speak to you right now, and I'm accountable to him, answerable to him for what I say. And I'm now very conscious about it. I'm now very conscious, right now, in this moment, very conscious that God is right there, listening to every word that comes up from my mouth, that I speak to you, and judge whether I'm speaking the truth or not. And hold me accountable to that. That's why earlier we have verses that says not everyone should be teachers, because you are twice as accountable. So that is about the various aspects of your lives. The third thing that he wants to talk about is then, okay, so if you're not in this, the wealthy and the oppressed group, not an oppressor group, then what happens? Be patient, then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. So then you suffer, isn't it? Say, I want revenge. God says, vengeance is mine. That's the Christian worldview. You see? Otherwise, you'll be out for blood. Let's revolutionize, right? Let's throw a revolution. Viva la revolution. Right? And take matters into our own hands. And we know the history of that one. But rather be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. The Lord will come back. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm. The seed has been planted, it will grow. It takes time because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. That is, he's just there. He's just right there. Anytime that door can swing open and the judge appears. Anytime. And we got to believe that, because that is the truth. At any time that door can swing open, and lo and behold, the judge is there. So in the face of difficulties that we go through, the difficulties that the brothers and sisters during the times of James were going through because of their faith in Jesus Christ, because they have this worldview, but the rest of the world doesn't have the same worldview, so they suffer the worst for it. Well, the judge is standing at the door. So therefore, brothers and sisters, the second time, as an example of patience in the face of suffering. You're not the first person in the world who's going through this. You're not the only person in the world who's going through this. You may say, why me? Well, of course you, because there have been many people before you who has gone through the same thing. For example, the prophets. Take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Look at them. They suffered and paid a high price. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. The prophets who persevered, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, they prophesied, they suffered for it, they persevered. We count them as blessed. The apostles, Jesus persevered. He's the blessed Lord. And you have heard of Job's perseverance in the book of Job, and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. I mean, we don't have to belabor the point of Job's perseverance. There is some perseverance. And have seen what the Lord finally brought about. In the previous paragraph, it says, don't grumble against one another, because you think that it is another human being who is the cause of your misery. No, our struggle is never against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the principalities, against the spiritual forces of evil. So we don't grumble against one another. Likewise, you don't grumble against God. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. the Israelites full of history of grumbling against God. And they grumbled and they grumbled and they grumbled and they said, forget about this. We will build a golden calf and serve other gods. Change our worldview. And they were punished for it. And then Moses pleaded with God and said, show me your glory. And it is in that context that the Lord announced, I am the Lord, full of compassion and mercy. And he will reveal himself one day. Just as he revealed to himself to Moses, but not face to face, because you cannot see his face and live. But one day we will see him face to face. The Lord who is full of compassion and mercy. So therefore, this is yet another aspect. So 3 aspects that the book of James in these chapters cover about the Christian worldview, not by philosophizing, but by giving practical examples. And therefore we can take the same practical examples that he gave about God's will, about God's sovereignty, about tomorrow, about what we think we will be doing, thinking that all these things can be done and decided without God in the picture, to oppressing others, to now that you are under oppression. And from these examples we can extrapolate to other aspects of life, to family living, to relationship between spouses, to children, parents, to bosses and workers, to every aspect of life, whether it is on matters of sexuality, whether it is on matters of identity, whether it is on basically anything. The Christian worldview is there is a God, and we know what kind of God he is, and we know who he is and what he has done in the person of Jesus Christ. So in this particular one, we have God is sovereign over our lives. That should be part of our Christian worldview, that God will punish evildoers, and so be patient. If we put on the Christian worldview every day with reverence and knowledge that he is there, then you will have the fear of the Lord in your life, and your life will be different. Will be very, very different, because your worldview will affect your thinking, and your thinking will impact your action. And that's all I have to share today.